All right, so let's get started here on today's webinar talking about DJI Terra Overview. And this is some software I hadn't had access to up until about a month and a half, 2 months ago. I got a trial license from DJI for Terra, and I've been quite impressed with it so far. And so I wanted to go through kind of some of the ins and outs of DJI Terra. And in the last slide, I have a comparison to what I've been getting out of Pix4D. So hopefully we find that everybody finds this useful. I'm joined today with my coworker, John Parker, who's here as well. And so without further ado, let's go ahead and kick this off. We are monitoring the channel for questions, so please be sure to post any questions you have as we go through this. So what is DJI Terra? And if you go to the DJI website, you'll see that they have an advertisement or a banner sort of like this here, where they talk about how DJI Terra can plan, process, analyze, and execute a drone mission. And so really it's a sort of an all-in-one, one-stop kind of shop that does a little bit of everything, but maybe not always as perfectly as we might like. So the first place I'd always like to encourage folks to go with is to, we'll say, RTFM, and that's read the full manual. And so it's always good to take some time and reference the user manual, and the folks from DJI have created about a 50-page long user manual for what I've got right now, version 2.3, that was released on February 4th of 2021. I'm expecting perhaps a version 2.4 or something like that as the upcoming L1 LiDAR unit comes out, but that's not out just yet. So right now we're talking about version 2.3 and all of its capabilities. So let's go ahead and kick this off, but certainly take some time. You can scan this QR code here that I have up on the screen, and that'll take you directly to the DJI Terra user manual, or if you follow this other link I have down here at DJI.com, DJI/Terra info #downloads, that has all the different downloads available from DJI, such as the user manual, information about how to read the quality reports, etc. So definitely a good link to reference. And so when you look kind of at the overall options available with DJI Terra, they're currently offering 3 different packages. They have the basic, they're calling the online version, the Pro online and offline versions, and electricity online and offline versions. And I think their use of the term online and offline is a little bit misleading here. The folks at DJI don't really have any kind of a cloud option or access for you, sort of like Pix4D has a Pix4D cloud. Here, the basic online version, that's referencing that you need to have access to the internet for it to check your license status. There's actually no online processing at all. It's all desktop processing. It's just a matter of, do you need to have access to an internet server to validate your licensing? So this is all desktop software, even if it says online or offline versions here. That all has to do with how the license manager is checking things. So the first one, the basic, is really geared more towards agricultural operations. It's something you get when you buy a Phantom 4 multi-spec drone. You get a 1-year license to DJI Basic. And so it's a really helpful program. It'll process data from your multi-spec drone. You can do real-time 2D mapping. It'll do agricultural application kind of information. It'll spit out some zones, if you will. You can do some 2D reconstruction for both field and then 2D multi-spectral reconstruction, more of like a vineyard kind of, or vineyard kind of a place. Terrace kind of area. But you really can't do 3D reconstruction. And so you want to step up to the Pro version of DJI Terra if you're wanting something more comparable to what I'll call the full Pix4D Mapper suite. And so in that case, that would be the Pro license. And with the Pro license, you get access to all the functionality shown here with the blue check boxes. The only thing you're really missing is what they're calling the electricity application, and then also the electricity application and the detailed inspection information. And so I would consider the Pro version to be comparable to Pix4D Mapper, and then the electricity version to be more comparable to perhaps Pix4D Inspect, if you will, but not quite comparable there either. But really, the Pro version is the one I would recommend to most users. And so the first thing to consider is, like, what kind of hardware do you need to process or run DJI Terra? And that was really kind of straightforward. They have hardware specifications here I got off the DJI website. They're saying anything with an i5 or later. As far as the GPU goes, they're just saying any NVIDIA graphics card, really, for real-time mapping. For Video RAM, at least 4 gigs. Overall RAM on the computer, at least 8 gigabytes. And a hard disk drive of at least 500 gigabytes of free space, or 50 gigabytes of free space. And certainly encourage you to have a solid state drive. So these are all specs that are really kind of comparable to what you might have with like a Pix4D machine or something that you're processing other photogrammetry software with. There is one thing to keep in mind though. They are recommending a 32 gigabyte amount of RAM is the recommendation on the DJI Terra website. And they had this other little table here at the bottom saying with 32 gigs of RAM, you can process roughly a max photo amount of about 3,200 or 3,200 photos. We do want to keep in mind, though, that this information was originally published with the specs for images with a resolution of 4864 by 3648, which is roughly a 17.7 megapixel image. If you are going to be throwing P1 data at it, those images have a resolution of 8192 by 5460, or a 44.7 megapixel image. And so you're dealing with over double or almost 3 times the amount of data there. So you want to kind of up your RAM amount also equally. So, and I have 64 gigabytes of RAM running on my machine, and so far things have been running pretty smoothly, no real hiccups or problems, and so just something to keep in mind there. So what exactly does DJI Terra do? And they talked on that slide earlier how it does everything from mission planning to execution and analysis and everything. And at first blush, it sounds true, but when you dig a little bit deeper, it turns out that it may not be quite as robust as we initially thought. For planning and execution of flights, you can plan and execute flights for the Phantom 4 RTK, the Phantom 4 Pro version 2, the Phantom 4 the Phantom 4 Pro Plus version 2, Phantom 4 Pro, Phantom 4 Advanced, and Phantom 4. But that's really currently the only drone that is supported for the flight planning and execution is the actual Phantom 4 itself. And so it won't currently do flight planning for the M300 or the other drones, but it can certainly process data from any of the Phantom 4 series, the Phantom 4 Multispec, Phantom 4, etc. And also they claim that it can, well, I know it can process data from the P1. I processed some projects with it. I haven't had a chance yet to throw any L1 LiDAR data unit at it yet. They're saying that Terra will be processing that LiDAR information as well, which is exciting. I think that might be at the next release, version 2.4. And then also something I didn't realize is that the DJI Terra can currently process data from the X7 camera if you're running that on an M210. So you can certainly leverage data processing with that platform as well. And then once you've processed your data, you can also do what they are calling 2D and 3D measurements, and they use the word annotation. I took the word annotation off here because I don't really feel as if you're annotating the document, but you can certainly do 2D and 3D measurements for points. You get coordinates. You can do linear measurements in both 2D and 3D. You can do area measurements, and then of course also volume measurements come out. And so there are some measurement capabilities in here beyond processing. But I wouldn't really say it's like a full map, like you don't get a map out of the software or something like that, but you do get data just like other photogrammetry softwares that you can then use in third-party mapping softwares to create a final finished product. And so this is a similar slide to what I showed earlier, but just kind of going back and reviewing what's available with the 3 different packages again. We're going to primarily focus here on the Pro package. The Pro package here in the center because that has most of the capabilities. The version I'm currently running right now is I do have the full electricity version, and the benefit I gained from that in one of the projects I'll show here through the webinar is I did get good power line reconstruction. And if you're looking for power lines, certainly you'd want to step up and get the electrical version or electricity version. Otherwise, I think the Pro version would be more than sufficient. And so when you go to plan a mission, if you're trying to use one of those Phantom 4 drones, you have a couple of different options available. They have ways to input waypoints for setting a path and defining waypoint actions for each waypoint. You can do general, what we'll call real or mapping missions, doing both 2D or 3D. They have an oblique option. With the oblique option, since this is currently only supporting the Phantom 4, if you choose the oblique option, once you define the area that you're looking to map, the software does generate 5 different flight plans where you'll get one nadir mission over the center, then oblique missions on the left, right, forward, and backward positions. And then also you can define a corridor mission. It's really slick. You just simply digitize or import a KML file showing the line along which the corridor you're trying to operate, and then you can specify the variables for how much offset on each side of the corridor, etc. And then they also have a detailed inspection mode that allows you to import a point cloud or an LAS file from a previous mission, and then use that to plan a 3D sort of inspection mission, if you will, around that particular object. I've had a chance to plan a mission. I haven't had a chance yet to try to conduct that particular mission, but it's something on my list to do here very soon. So when you go in and you're trying to plan a waypoint mission, you might find, or you will find, that you have these sort of input or user input interfaces here where you set the various settings or variables to define the waypoint mission. And as I went through and I played with the waypoint mission settings, I found it to be a less than efficient way to try to plan out a mapping mission. The waypoint mission would be great if you're trying to sort of move around and capture images of a construction site for documentation purposes, but it would be kind of cumbersome to try to plan out a really robust mapping mission using just the waypoint option. So I didn't spend a whole lot of time playing with that. The next one is my preferred option. That's the mapping settings. And this is where you have the option to set if you're going to be using real-time 2D mapping or real-time 3D point cloud generation is also an option. Kind of low resolution, but it can do some. Then also mapping scenes. You have the option of doing a field, an urban, or an orchard type area. And so typically for human-built environments, the urban option would be appropriate. Here we see the field options coming up. You have the option to set your finishing actions if you want the drone to hover after a mission or return to home. Oh, I see we have a question here. Let's see here. Aaron, did you... Let's see. Let's try to read this first question here. Aaron, did you say you can do oblique missions for the P4? Is it similar to Smart Oblique with the P1? Unfortunately, no, it doesn't do Smart Obliques within DJI Terra yet. I'm hopeful that they'll activate that for the P1, but I don't see the gimbal on the Phantom 4 to be designed in such a way that would really allow for a Smart Oblique mission with the P1, but I do appreciate that question.
Can this be done on the controller, or do you have to do this from the computer?
Yeah, so that was one of the points that I kind of get to, or I was going to mention here later. One of the great things about Terra is that you can actually do flight planning through kind of a computer interface, but ultimately you have to take the computer with you out into the field and have the computer hooked up to the remote control during the mission. And so because the weather here in Colorado has been less than ideal for the last couple of weeks and months, I've not got to try running a mission with DJI Terra yet out in the field, but I have processed a number of projects with it.
So you didn't want to take your computer out into 3 feet of snow. Okay.
Yeah, that is one of the downsides to Terra, or not downsides, because on Terra allows you to plan missions and process data. So maybe you don't do the flight planning so much in Terra, you do that with other third-party app, but it does do processing as well. But here under the mapping settings, you have the basic settings, advanced, where you can set front and side overlap. You can adjust your course angle. One of the things the Pix4D Capture app doesn't allow is to set a margin, and this one does. So you can sort of set a buffer around your project area or a margin to increase that overlap on the edges of your project. You can define a relative height, and then also you have quite a bit of camera settings as far as you want to set your aspect ratio to 4:3, white balance, exposure, etc. You can get in and play with all those capabilities, which is really nice. In the next option here as we go, so mapping missions are the first. The oblique settings here would be the next, and this is an option where you can plan oblique missions with the Phantom 4. There's not an option to do a smart oblique mission, if you will, here. It just does the standard 5 mission where you do one over the center and then oblique missions kind of around the side, but you get the same kind of camera settings here under oblique, so you can plan out a very efficient, nice mission. And then, of course, you have similar settings under corridor, where you get the option to sort of do a route preview. You can do an expansion distance on the left or an expansion distance on the right. Oh, we have another question come in. Does it have a follow terrain option or any of the planning options? And so there is a component within the app while you're flying it where you can import a digital surface model, and it'll follow that for flight planning, but it's not leveraging any kind of onboard sensors on the Phantom 4 Pro to do that terrain following. You need to import a digital surface model into your remote controller off of the SD card for it to leverage that terrain following. But great question. Thank you for sharing it with us. And so on with the the settings here for corridor settings. You set your mission altitude, your speed, your at finish action. You can return to home, hover, land, etc. And then also you can set a collection method for the corridor with a full coverage option, which will cover areas kind of east or both sides of the corridor. Or there's also an efficient option where it really just captures a string of data right down the center of your corridor for a faster sort of rapid mapping option as well. And then an option that I haven't had a chance to play with as much in depth yet as I'd like, I've planned some missions, I haven't gotten to execute one yet, is the detailed inspection method. And with that, you need to import a point cloud file from a previous mission, and then that'll pop up within the Terra interface, and then you can plan within that 3D point cloud your specific photo points that you want to have inspected or inspected during the mission, and set the flight route and adjust things. And I'm looking forward to running a mission from one of the data sets I've collected, just haven't had a chance to do that just yet. And so here's a first look at sort of the DJI Terra interface. When you start up the software, you get this left-hand kind of control panel here that will list off here at the top. You see these three icons. The top blue one is for 2D mapping. The second one down is for multispectral mapping. And then the last one here with the pyramids on it is for 3D oblique missions, if you will, or 3D mapping. And then these other areas down below here are for the different mission planning options. So once you've kind of flown your mission or you have some data, you can then import it here. And using these options up here, you have the option to import data or export data, which I haven't done yet. But you can import, but also just go in and essentially create a mapping mission this way, and we'll show you that in detail here in a moment. And so for the reconstruction missions, you have three different options. You have the ability to do what we'll call a 2D map. It's really just going to be that orthomosaic top-down. Unfortunately, it doesn't seem that DJI Terra is doing any kind of contour line generation, but you do get a good 2D map that you could then use the digital surface model in QGIS or ArcGIS, etc., to generate contour lines from that DSM. And then also you can add annotations and measurements. 2D multispectral map, very handy. I loaded in some data from the Phantom 4 multispec drone, and it processed that data quite smoothly and was able to generate a number of different vegetation indices based on the spectral bands available with the P4M. And then lastly, you can do a 3D model. And then after your model is produced, as a user, you can go in and add measurements and add annotation and things like that to share with other folks. So let's go look at this a little bit deeper. Once again, on the reconstruction missions, some things to keep in mind. I found that maybe every flight pattern or plan that you use won't allow for processing in all the different processing options, if you will. So for photos captured in a mapping or a corridor mission, you can do both the 2D reconstruction and 3D reconstruction are achievable through the software. And of course, you can do agricultural specific functions based on the 2D map. But I have run into some issues where photos captured in an oblique mission, you can only do a 3D model reconstruction. It won't allow you to produce a 2D model if you don't have some nadir images. And so I was a little surprised at that, where with Pix4D, you can throw just oblique data at it and it'll still generate a 2D map. But in this case, Terra seems to be looking to have some nadir data as well and not just oblique data to do a 2D map. And then in the imported photos the imported photos do include PPK results from the cloud PPK service, the Phantom 4 RDK. These PPK data, the data will be used for 2D and 3D reconstruction at a higher accuracy, so it will incorporate that, which is very nice. And then earlier we mentioned the mapping scene options. You have field, urban, and they're calling it fruit tree. I was for some reason replacing that in my mind with the word orchard, but they use the word fruit tree.
A lot of fruit trees are in orchards.
Yes, they are. Yes, very, very good observation. So you do have these these reconstruction options here available. And then so for 2D mapping, when you go in, you have when you tell it to create a new mission, you go ahead and you can do 2D map, define your mapping scene, define your resolution if you want low, medium, or high. Typically high is the default. And then after processing, you can access the annotation, measurement, and agricultural application, depending on which kind of data you're putting at the drone. And then whenever the mission is complete, it writes your results, if you will, out in, for 2D mapping, you get just a geotip. There's no other option available. And then for other 3D outputs, there's some things. But the path that it writes out to is it writes out to like user, computer name, documents, Terra, yada, yada. And I'm a little disappointed that it does write out that gives the name of your result. In your folder, it's just called map/results.tif. So no matter how many different missions you run, all your files go into different folders, but the OrthoMosaic is called results.tif for each one. So when you go to add that to a third-party software, it's kind of hard to, you need to rename the file ultimately. So I'm not happy with the file naming. Similar kind of things with 2D multi-spec map reconstruction. It does do full radiometric correction based on the information from the light sensor built into P4M. The calibration board data is imported. And it has a way to incorporate or import calibration data. And then also the vegetation indices that you can create include NDVI, then some other ones I'm not as familiar with, LCI, the greenness NDVI, OS AVI, and an NDRE. But agricultural folks will understand those a bit better. But again here, it's giving the name of all your outputs a rather undescriptive results underscore what the vegetation index is .tif. And so I'm not real happy with the naming convention there, but it does produce good looking output files. And so yeah, the files or the data generated are, when you run the project, you can go through and then export out the data. And when you export the data, you go into an interface like this here and you use the icon here for RTK test, where it shows this export icon out of a folder bin. And then it simply asks you what you want to export: photos, 2D maps, 3D models, or aerial triangulation results. That's really the only radio buttons or checks you get there. So you check those options, hit OK. And then from that point, the software creates these output folders. You get one called map that then has a bunch of different folders in it that have tile files at different resolutions, similar to like Google Tiles. Then down here you can see they named it DSM and result. And so I'm a little disappointed in that, but overall it does good work in processing, just not real happy with the format of some of the outputs here. And in the models folder, again, you get a separate folder for each of the different outputs you did. So I have a folder here for Terra, B3DMS, Terra I3S, Terra LAS, OBJ, etc. All the different file formats I selected. Those output files are all dumped into those folders there. And then so the available reconstruction outputs, once again, for the aerial triangulation, the default value that it uses is the Terra file format. You can ask that it output an XML file that would work as a context capture block exchange format, I suppose. Then with the point cloud data, by default, the data is coming out as a PNTS or a points file, and that would be a file that works natively, I believe, with CCM point cloud. It's a CCM point cloud. And then you can also select or request that you get a file format in S3MB or the standard .las. And that SMB3 is a supermap GIS level of detail point cloud format. I'm not super familiar with supermap, but it's something I'm going to be looking into more. And then when it comes to the 3D models that you can output, once again, you can do this B3DM, which is a CCM kind of file format. The OSGB is an open standards graphics database, I think, or something close to that, where it'll do levels of details. The PLY is a non-LOD format. OBJ and S3IM. And then one other thing to keep in mind, there was one last one thing, an I3S, and that's a format that apparently is easily digested by ArcGIS server if you're trying to serve stuff out on the cloud. And then you also get a quality report similar to, but I don't really want to use the word similar, but you get quality reports for both 2D and 3D processing. I find the 2D quality report to be much more helpful. It's only a couple of pages long, but it does include a thumbnail of your top-down view. You get a thumbnail of your digital surface model, and also what we'll call an overlap or image coverage analysis map showing how many images captured each area. And so in this area here, you're looking for the primary project area to be covered by the purple blob. In the center, that means you're getting lots of good looks at it, and you should get good reconstruction. When I ran a 3D processing report, unfortunately, there were none of these kind of graphics associated with it. It was just some tables, similar to the tables you'll get in the Pix4D quality report, but overall, not as informative or helpful to a first-time reader or viewer, if you will. Oh, we have another question coming in here. Is it possible to export orthomosaics in ECW format? No, I'm afraid at this point in time it's not. I'm not saying that won't come available later, but right now the GeoTIFF or the orthomosaic is only coming out as a GeoTIFF format right now, and you'd have to put that into a third-party software to get that ECW compression, I'm afraid. But thank you for asking. And so as we're looking here at the quality report, we can look at an actual quality report when you get into the software. Let's get back. And then just kind of a quick overview of one software versus the other, not to try to pit one versus the other, but DJI Terra is certainly trying to fill a niche that Pix4D Mapper has been occupying for some time now. And so on the first point, flight planning, DJI Terra has that built into it. You can do your flight planning. Pix4D Mapper, you actually leverage a third software called Pix4D Capture. It's free software. There's no charge for that. So overall, there's really no, I'm not going to call a winner on this one because you can do flight planning on both. You're only able to really flight plan for DJI drones with DJI Terra. With Pix4D Mapper, they're set up for a wider variety of DJI drones. They can work with Mavic data or Mavic drones as well, and more drones than just the Phantom 4 right now. With data processing, you can, I'm calling DJI Terra here sort of limited to drones and sensors. You can really only use the Phantom 4, the L1, the P1, and the X7. Whereas with Pix4D Mapper, it's a little bit more what we'll call hardware agnostic. It can process really images from any digital camera. And for flight planning, again, you're back to Pix4D Capture that has a list of drones that it supports, but you can also just capture data manually. Both Terra and Pix4D allow for incorporating ground control points or GCPs in your project. It seemed like the Pix4D Mapper workflow was a little bit easier and more intuitive, but it is available in both. You can do export out of both software options or both softwares. However, you do ultimately get, I'm going to say, more options in Pix4D Mapper, such as you can generate contour lines. You can also generate a grid DSM and a few other options that aren't currently available with Terra, but you do get good quality GeoTIFFs and 3D models out of Terra. As far as the data export option goes, you're getting a few more options, I believe, out of Pix4D Mapper, but not significantly different. Help and documentations. Currently, there's a 50-page user manual available on the DJI website. And for Pix4D, I haven't really summarized all their help documentation, but they have a wealth of data through their online support. And within the software itself, there's a help button on many locations you can click on that'll give you content-specific information. Unfortunately, I haven't found a help button yet in DJI Terra. You kind of need to refer back to that 50-page user manual or experiment and figure it out as you go along. And then also for cloud sharing, currently DJI Terra, like certainly you can load projects up to like Sketchfab or some other third-party softwares, but there's no DJI direct way to share via the cloud, whereas Pix4D Mapper does have a Pix4D cloud option. However, that Pix4D cloud option does come at an additional cost. It's not bundled with the desktop, so kind of a tie there. Both of the softwares are very easy to use. There's not a whole lot of buttons to get lost in or menus and things like that currently with Terra, but neither is there with Pix4D. As far as the output quality goes, really, really impressed with the quality of the orthomosaics. I'm sorry, by both the orthomosaics and the mesh I'm getting out of DJI Terra. However, within the Pix4D software, there is an mosaic editor where you can sort of specify what image is filling a specific spot on your thing, so you have a bit more flexibility there. Oh, I have a question here. Can you speak to the comparison difference with DJI Terra and Litchi? Well, to my use and understanding, Litchi is a great flight planning software, but in the long run, it doesn't do any kind of data processing for Litchi.
Photogrammetry.
Yeah, it's not a photogrammetry software. It's really a flight planning execution software. And so certainly you can fly using Litchi to capture oblique or nadir data and still process it with DJI Terra, but I don't really think that Litchi or Litchi does really nearly as much as what DJI Terra can do. And then on the quality reports front, you do get quality reports out of both softwares, the 2D and 3D quality reports out of Terra, and then a Pix4D Mapper quality report. I think the Pix4D report's a little bit more informative and helpful, but overall, you do get good, useful information out of both reports. And so let's go ahead and kick out here and look just a few moments at Terra before we conclude this here. So within the Terra interface itself, it comes up here. You can see a list here on my left-hand side of different projects that I've run. If I switch, like right now, I'm here on 3D model. So these are all the different 3D models that I've run over time. And then I can switch up here. The next option up is 2D multi-spec. I just have this one 2D multi-spec one here, but if I click on that, you'll see that the map here centers and zooms over. And here we are at DGI Colorado at our warehouse location here. And I just ran a really quick, dirty flight test with a multi-spec drone over the green space outside. But it's really nice that it comes up here. And so we're looking at the RGB imagery right now. I can click here on the NDVI and it shows that imagery. I can move over to the G NDVI, or the greenness NDVI. LCI, oh, really makes the canoe over here on this one area stand out, doesn't it? The canoe on that boat. I'm curious what material that canoe is made out of. NDRE and OSVI. So you do get these kind of things, but I haven't found a lot of additional analysis in this just yet for vegetation, but I need to work more in this area. And then with the 2D maps, of course, we can go in here if we wanted to see like the project that I processed a couple weeks ago with from the M300. We can see here on the 2D map, we get an initial nice top-down kind of view of the water park. If I want to look at the 3D model here, I can come over and right there is the 2D map. I can choose 3D model. And let's just zoom in kind of briefly here and look at the quality of this 3D model. So in this particular example, I had done, I'd left what we'll call it a tape measure here on the ground just to see what my measurements were going to come out as. And if I go in here and look at my annotation measurements option, I can see that I happen to put down a 25-foot tape measure right here from that red spot to over here to this red spot. And that came out with a measurement of 24.97, which is right on par really with what I was getting out of Pix4D when I processed in that software. So I'm 0.03 of an inch off there, and I got a straight distance right at 25 feet, so that worked out pretty well. And if we kind of just look at the quality of the model in general here, there's a little bit different key code combinations to navigate around. There we go. But I was really impressed with the quality of like the reconstruction of the trees, or these palm trees that are here at the water park. Certainly there's some smudging underneath the canopy structure and around, but even these small features that reconstructed that were like some kind of a hose thing here, or like a water park play area. I'm going to give this more of a top-down view. Here we go. And then I did some measurements on the right-of-ways that were visible here. So a surveyor had come out before me and had marked some areas. If I zoom in here, you can kind of see the flagging on the ground. The surveyors had come out and marked areas such that with all these right-of-way markings, let's just test here real quick. I forget which right. Oh, yeah. So this right-of-way marking there came in at 75.07 feet, and I was expecting a measurement of 75 feet from marks that were a surveyor put out. So very good, accurate measurements there. Oops, just added onto that. Cancel. And if we come back over here, we can check out some other ones. This was another one here. And we can see this right-of-way measurement came out 75.03 feet. So good, consistent measurements all the way across the project here. And I was just really impressed with the level of detail as far as the roof and the building here. I put down a 5-foot sky ruler here around this building, or not around it, but just off to the side of it here. So if we look at the 5-foot sky ruler, once again, 4.99 feet on that measurement. But really good, what I think, stunning reconstruction of small little details throughout the model. Certainly it's not perfect. Ooh, there's some trees. I work on my driving. But good quality reconstruction throughout. And even here, like the pool in the water park here, we can see the slide. Good quality detail on the wall, of the pool there with the paint stripes. And even got good information here for most of the fencing. I can see there's a few spots here the fence didn't quite fully reconstruct in 3D, but that's the same kind of thing happens in Pix4D type software, so it's not I wouldn't think a game breaker or deal breaker for anything here. And so overall, as we're panning around here, just excellent quality output and results from the software. And so when you go to enter in the information in the software, let's kick back out here a little bit. We can see here that you These bottom options here on the left are where you use for flight planning and mission planning, but when you go to process a project, you simply come in, say like start a new mission. You identify if you want to do a 2D map, 2D multispectral, or 3D model. You can also identify if you're trying to do a flight route creation. So if you're trying to do say a 2D map, you simply choose 2D map. You give the map a name. So we'll call this, give it a name there. And then at that point in time, you would go ahead and browse to a location with images. So you just click on the Add Images folder. In this case here, the Pirates Cove images here. So I can just select all of the images here in this folder. Just Control A to select them all. It'll go ahead and it'll import those photos there. Shows them very quickly on the item. And then to go ahead, I can go ahead and specify here if I want to do a 2D map or 3D model. You can't do both in one processing. You either process 2D map or 3D model. Then you can also specify if you're dealing with an urban, field, or fruit tree kind of scene. So this is more of an urban environment. And you can specify resolution high, medium, low. In this case, I've always chosen high in the past. I suppose we could. And then just simply hit Start Reconstruction. Typically, the reconstructions go relatively quickly. I would say it happens about the same speed, maybe a little bit faster than what Pix4D Mapper is going. And so it could take a couple of hours for a full reconstruction. How does DJI Terra compare to Drone Deploy? Well, I'll have to admit that I'm somewhat, I would say, biased against Drone Deploy. In my past life, I was a Pix4D employee prior to COVID, and I've always been a fan of Pix4D software. Drone Deploy certainly has its place, but I'm not a big fan of the black box nature where you upload your data to the cloud and it comes back and that's your answer. I like to have a little bit more granular depth and control of it. Certainly, you don't have the ability to get in and edit a point cloud file here like you can in Pix4D Mapper, and you can't really, I haven't found where you can do orthomosaic editing either. So I would say this is in some ways comparable to Drone Deploy, that you don't have a lot of user input of the device afterwards. But here you can also, when doing mapping missions, you can do GCP management. Right here, I don't have GCPs in this particular project to input, but you can do ground control points at no additional cost within DJI Terra. And I believe the folks there at Drone Deploy are going to charge you for each particular ground control point. I had a customer call and talk to me the other day, and they were looking for an alternative to Drone Deploy because they'd gotten hit by a rather large processing bill for the last year. They'd spent over, I think it was over $1,200 on ground control points. And they thought, well, how can we save that cost in the future? When purchasing an M300 with the P1, what version comes with the controller? So that's a good question. With the M300 and the P1, the software that comes on the controller we'll call is Pilot or DJI Pilot. And that's software that allows you to fly and operate the drone. It allows you to do the smart oblique mode, etc. But it won't do any data processing. And so I would right now, I don't believe that DJI Terra is set up to fly the M300. I would imagine that functionality will be coming very shortly as the P1 gets out into the wild. But right now, that's not set up that way. And so I have some more questions here. Oh, you get the aerial triangulation. Took a little bit to come up with there for the ground control points. Next question. When purchasing, just thank you. Any other questions from folks out there? Happy to address any kinds of questions that I can, and I won't give you any lies here. I've been very impressed with the quality of the outputs from Pix4D or from DJI Terra, but overall, right now, I myself would be inclined to probably stick with my Pix4D license for processing. Once they have the L1 out and I can process L1 data through Terra, that will totally change that equation. I think it would be a more cost-effective, better solution. But right now, I personally am a little bit more impressed with Pix4D still.
Pix4D is probably more feature-rich, a little more mature.
Yeah, exactly. It's been out a little bit longer, but at the same point in time, I don't think Pix4D is perfect, and it has a lot of room for growth and improvement as well. And then, so any app tablet support? Okay, so as far as any app and tablet, unfortunately, the options are when you're using the DJI Terra to fly the mission, you have to actually have your remote control hooked up to your computer via USB cable out in the field. So you're not just you have your laptop in the field with you, but you're somewhat chained or tethered to a couple of feet from your computer, if you will. And so my laptop usually has pretty good battery, but when it gets really cold outside here, it's less than ideal. So I don't really currently think DJI Terra is maybe the best app for a lot of flight planning. I'm really impressed with their detailed inspection flight capabilities as far as being able to import a 3D point cloud from a mission and then plan directly from that. I think that'll be something I'm looking forward to testing more. But right now, needing to take your laptop out in the field is kind of I don't want to say a deal breaker for me, but I don't want to use Terra to fly my missions currently just because the weather and the climate here doesn't seem useful for it. And so as far as apps and tablet support, you would have your tablet hooked up to your Phantom 4 RTK SDK remote control, and you could use a third-party app in that regards. But really, when you get right down to it, typically DJI Pilot or the DJI Go 4 app often have flight planning capabilities sufficient to get the flight captured in the field, then bring it in and do the processing with desktop DJI Terra or other software options. But okay, so that's the question up there. Let's see if we have any other questions here. How does it compare with drone deploy? No? All right. So I'm not able to really go through and process a full project here today with Pix4 or with DJI Terra because it does take a little while for it to do that. But you do have good capability to go in and plan 3D missions. If we look here at an aggregate mission I did recently over an area, I was super impressed with the quality. Here also you can see at first the grid of flights that was done over. This was the M300 here. We can switch over and look at this in a 3D model. And just really good resolution and detail here. We'll see here in this particular model, this being a 3D model, I also generated a point cloud, and we can see in the 3D mesh, I had a little bit of reconstruction here of a high tension power line that went through, a high tension pole, that went through my project. But if I turn on my point cloud data, we can see here that in the point cloud data, it actually, because I have that electricity license, it did a good job of reconstructing power lines from kind of a horizontal view here. We can see, certainly we can get a good idea of what that catenary curve is, or the bow and the lines. You get good reconstruction there. You can also turn on and visualize the data by height. So here we can see those power lines kind of over top of the rest of our aggregate infrastructure here through this site. And then very easy just to switch back again to RGB data. And then if I want to, we can go back into the model. But yeah, when the model comes back up, we kind of lose our perspective point there. We can kind of come back in here. And so the mesh didn't fully reconstruct the high tension power pole there, but it did a pretty good job of getting it. And we certainly see all the insulators here reconstructed in the mesh. But if we switch back up to the point cloud, we can see, I didn't want to zoom me back out there. You got quite a bit more detailed information here in the point cloud data itself. So a really good point cloud reconstruction. And so, yeah, I would not hesitate to process a project with DJI Terra again in the future, and I look forward to seeing how the software continues to develop and advance. I'd certainly like to see a bit more flexibility in the output folder structure as far as the reconstruction output. I simply come in here and specify what output files I want. And unfortunately, there's not an option that I can just generate a different output kind of after the fact. If I all of a sudden now want to get an OSGB file format out of this, when I click this here, I would actually need to go through now and restart the reconstruction again and rerun it. So that's a little unfortunate there as well. You can't just pick the different file types after the fact. But overall, the quality of the reconstruction by DJI Terra is like second to none, I would say, and does excellent quality work very quickly and is very intuitive when you're working within the software. I'd like to see a little bit more development, being able to customize file names as opposed to just result.tif for everything, but overall very good. And so if you have any questions about DJI Terra or would like to learn more about it, please feel free to reach out to either John or I here at Multicopter Warehouse. My contact information is awoods at Multicopter Warehouse, and John Parker, of course, can be gotten from jparker at multicopterwarehouse.com as well.
Real time.
In real time, yes. So please feel free to reach out to us. We'd love to hear from you if you have questions, and we're always happy to help, whether it be with Pix4D, DJI Terra, Web Open Drone Map, whatever you're using to process your data. we can help you get good results, and we're happy to. So please check back next week. John will be presenting his impressions of what it's like to go through the Pix4D certification class online.
That will be exciting.
Yes. So thanks.
I have a mentor.
Thanks for joining us here this week. And again, please reach out to us. We'd love to answer questions and to help folks get the best quality results with any of their drone projects. So thanks so much, and tune back in again soon.